She stood alone, no rank, no badges, just a scarred back and a silence that made grown soldiers lower their eyes. They thought stripping her uniform would strip her worth. But when the general saw the tattoo carved into her shoulder, he didn't speak. Because that mark was his daughter's handwriting, and she had died on a battlefield only one person walked away from. Private First Class Lena Morgan stood at attention, sweat beading down her spine as the courtroom-style tribunal echoed with whispers. Her name had been dragged through dirt, accused of cowardice under fire, of abandoning her unit. The truth? Classified. The scars? Covered. The cost? Unspoken. They stripped her uniform in front of everyone. Then the general froze at the tattoo she carried. They made her stand while they read the charges, stripped her rank while cameras flashed, and when they pulled the nameplate from her chest, it fell harder than her silence ever could. They expected rage. They got steel. They expected tears. She gave them a look that said, "You'll regret this." Because Lena knew the truth wasn't in the papers they waved. It was etched into her shoulder, a tattoo she swore never to show again, until today. Because what they didn't know was that the girl they thought they were breaking was the woman who had carried out a mission so black it didn't exist on paper. And the one who sent her there was sitting at the end of the panel, General Barrett, the same man who now watched her quietly, the same man whose lips parted ever so slightly when her shirt slipped, revealing a handwritten phrase burned into her shoulder blade. "Stay brave, Daddy. Eliza." They stripped her uniform in front of everyone. Then the general froze at the tattoo she carried. Because Eliza Barrett had died in Syria, and Lena was the only one who brought her home. And now the silence in the room wasn't shame, it was reckoning. They stripped her uniform in front of everyone, but when the general saw the tattoo, he didn't speak. He couldn't, because the words inked into her skin were written by the daughter he thought had died. The room didn't breathe. The general's hand trembled on the desk, his eyes locked on Lena's tattoo, those 6 childlike words etched in faded black ink. "Stay brave, Daddy. Eliza." His chest rose like it wanted to say something, but nothing came out. One officer asked if Lena had anything to say in her defense. She didn't need to. The scar on her shoulder, just below the tattoo, was shaped like a shrapnel wound. But the real impact was emotional, not physical. They thought she was just a low-ranking supply tech, but Lena wasn't just a soldier. She was Eliza's sister, and Eliza was the general's daughter. The room started connecting dots no one was ready to admit. Flashback. 3 years earlier, Lena and Eliza served in the same convoy unit overseas. A roadside ambush shattered the lead vehicle. Lena crawled through fire to pull Eliza from the wreckage, but Eliza didn't make it. The last thing she said, "Tell him I wasn't afraid." Lena had the message tattooed 2 weeks later, after filing paperwork no one ever read. Because soldiers like her didn't get medals. They got discharged, forgotten, silenced. But now the tattoo had spoken louder than any rank. And the general, the man who sat silently while she was humiliated, now looked at her like he was staring at a ghost. Because she didn't just carry his daughter's words, she carried what was left of her. They stripped her uniform in front of everyone. Then, the general froze at the tattoo she carried. Because those words weren't just ink. They were evidence of a cover-up that went higher than anyone dared admit. The tribunal was dismissed for emergency adjournment, but everyone knew what it meant. They needed time to suppress what just surfaced. Because Lena hadn't just embarrassed the general, she had exposed a thread in a story they'd buried. And if she pulled it, the whole system might unravel. Lena was escorted to a private holding area, but not under arrest. Not anymore. Now, she was protected. Or monitored. Same thing in military politics. That night, her file was flagged for security clearance reassessment. Translation? They were finally opening the pages they'd sealed shut when she first came home. Inside those pages, her request for a silver star, ignored. Her debrief report from the ambush, redacted. Her note to Eliza's family, undeliverable. It was never about rank. It was about truth. And Lena's truth had been too dangerous to process. Because if Eliza hadn't died instantly, if her last words were real, someone had failed to protect her. Someone high up. The general sat alone that night, staring at an old photo of his daughter in uniform. Then he did something no one expected. He walked into Lena's holding room. No escorts, no camera, no rank. He sat across from her like a man, not a commander. He asked, "Was it real?" Her words? Lena just nodded. He broke. Not with tears, with resolve. The next day, the military press office received a letter. It wasn't classified. It was a confession, signed by the general, acknowledging Lena's heroism, recommending her for reinstatement, and admitting that her treatment had been a failure of honor. The story spread like wildfire, but the people didn't latch on to the protocol, because by now, that wasn't just her story. It was every silenced veteran's story, tattooed into the conscience of a nation. Before the press conference, before the tribunal collapsed, before the whispers became orders, there was a signature. One that would unchain a legacy, written not in ink, but in the blood and silence of women who wore the uniform before anyone believed they had earned it. The Pentagon hadn't seen a classified override in nearly 27 years, but today, the override came from inside, not from above. When Lena stood at that microphone, she wasn't a disgraced corporal anymore. She was the embodiment of every woman forced to wear courage like armor and pain like protocol. They stripped her uniform in front of everyone. Then the general froze at the tattoo she carried. That headline had traveled farther than any bullet ever had. Behind her, news cameras flickered. Before her, rows of veterans, scarred, silenced, proud. The general didn't show, but his apology did. Signed, broadcast, submitted to the National Archives. It read, "I failed to protect those who carried out my orders, but one of them carried my daughter out of the fire and wore a message for me on her skin when I didn't deserve it." He resigned the same morning, but his absence spoke louder than his medals ever had. Inside the archives, the truth was no longer redacted. Lena's file, once marked insubordinate, was amended, rank reinstated, benefits restored, Medal of Valor, post-dated, posthumous, and placed in her mother's trembling hands at a silent ceremony where no cameras were allowed. But Lena wasn't there. She'd already walked away from the institution. Not in disgrace, but in decision. Her next stop wasn't retirement. It was a high school gymnasium where she gave a speech no one expected. If they can strip your uniform, they'll try to strip your memory. Don't let them. Make your pain permanent, like ink. Let them freeze when they see what you survived. She founded the Scarline Foundation the same year, a program connecting female veterans with trauma recovery, education, and leadership training. The logo? A single tattoo. No name, just a scar woven into a shield. They stripped her uniform in front of everyone. Then the general froze at the tattoo she carried. That line had become legend. But for Lena, it wasn't legacy she wanted. It was policy change. And by the time Congress passed the Uniform Equity Act, it had her name in the footnotes. In the end, Lena disappeared from headlines. But she didn't disappear. Her story was no longer just hers. It belonged to every soldier whose name never made it to a plaque. It lived on walls, in whispers, and in one quiet truth. When they tried to erase you, ink louder.